what's the strongest possible Requiem power? Polnareff's incomplete Requiem can swap souls around across who knows how far a range, and Giorno's unstoppable with the ability to automatically rewind the actions of others before they can complete them. But even though it's invincible, Giorno's power can't inherently do what Polnareff's does. Giorno can't cause this body-changing effect unprompted and on an entire area around him, because just like with normal stands, there's variety in Requiems. And if some stands can be stronger than others, then what's the strongest Requiem power that would be possible for someone to awaken in JoJo's universe? It depends on the mechanics of Requiem as a power-up, but we also need to consider which stands could have hypothetically awakened it. Because in-universe fate impacts the stands people can awaken, we would have to find a scenario that fits a character's established destiny, the wider story they're in, and the rest of the continuity of the series, in order to say there was a way it could have been possible in-universe for them to have awakened a Requiem. And I'd limit this to the stands we know exist in the original universe, where we know the stand arrows have been. The concept of Requiem is pretty straightforward, and this is a bad analogy to follow that claim up with, but if a stand is like a boat to better carry someone across the currents of fate and get to the outcomes they want, which could be why the stand about strength is symbolically a massive ship, and fate in Part 6 is compared to an ocean, a Requiem is like building another colossal boat around your boat, like the Black Whale, so normal ships can't compete with it. The concept of awakening a stand is injected into your existing stand, so you awaken a new stand concept as another will inside your stand's body, with a new ability theme that grants you new powers through reimaginings of your base abilities. The Requiem, if properly tamed because you're tested for worthiness again, uses those abilities on your behalf. And its theme, just like how your stand symbolizes your influence as a person, symbolizes your influence with your stand. Giorno's initial strength comes from breathing life, humanity, and hope into things like his nation and Bruno's heart, and protecting anyone under him to gain their loyalty and two-way protection. So he awakens a symbolic power to directly weaponize that, which is Gold Experience, with creating new living creatures and reversing damage done to them. And then, using Gold Experience in battle against another stand user, Giorno is repeatedly able to deny Diavolo the arrow. And the act of taking the arrow for himself and using it to awaken his Requiem is a continuation of this. So he's locking in and achieving a power-up around his influence with his stand, which throughout this fight, and culminating in this action itself, is denial, which is why he ends up with an ability to reverse damaging actions, and an ability to send someone to a new life whenever they're going to die. Copies of Gold Experience's damage reversal and new life creation have been stripped of their original theme of growth, and now they're given new functionality to symbolize Giorno's denial of Diavolo's actions. So the power to prevent someone's attacks from happening, and the power to make sure they're sent somewhere else to live a new life over and over again. Giorno was hostile toward Diavolo, so this is more a purgatory, where he can suffer again and again in different conjured scenarios kind of like Underworld. And a fitting theme for Gold Experience's Requiem is truth, because locking in a stand or awakening a Requiem means Giorno now has the strength to always deny Diavolo's goals and trap him in artificial worlds. But influence isn't just personal talent and the motivation that directs what your actions will accomplish. It also depends on the external opportunities you're given in life by the world around you. Giorno hasn't been doomed by fate here, and the Rolling Stone hasn't sculpted him, so he's allowed to awaken a Requiem that won't let him lose. Jotaro might get the power to compress and concentrate his strength, to multiply its potency and increase its range, and eventually gain the ability to stop time and freeze everything around him. But Jolene, with similar wit, endurance, dedication, and proactiveness, might only get the power to change the shape of her own body and spread herself thin, because her life is rigged. So just like how a stand is bound by three things, a person's talents, their goals, and the remaining opportunities they really still have, a Requiem also needs to take these into account. If we're being safe, not only are we considering someone's initial stand ability and the scenario they awaken their Requiem in to guess what their powers would be, we're also considering what their in-universe destiny is and their story's purpose to limit how they would be allowed to awaken a Requiem, so their character can still fit within the story and follow the prophesized details of their in-universe fate. Some sources of destiny can be reasonably changed. Punching the rolling stone lets you alter the prophecy, Bites the Dust can be cancelled, and Epitaph can be overpowered. But the fate trapping the Joestars, for example, was fueled by the universe itself, which was why it took Emporio triumphing in a battle over the forces of the universe to finally break that curse. The problem here is that Requiem is a finite power-up. As strong as it is, it's still just a bigger boat, which is a flat improvement even if it towers over every other stand user. As mentioned before, its additional power comes from adding the influence of the arrow to your stand and convincing it to work for you. So because we're limiting this to scenarios that don't break the stories, we're saying a character can never get a Requiem that would directly overpower a curse enforced by the universe itself. Which means, even if someone as capable as Jotaro got a Requiem, maybe at Cape Canaveral, he couldn't have awakened something there strong enough to bridge that gap between him and Pucci and break free of that fate. Pucci was weaponizing that curse, making every Joestar an asset for the Heaven Plan and destined to lose against him. So at most, Jotaro would get something like the power of succession, to immediately complete something and jump to its successor. And while that could throw Pucci's movements off, or even start sending things to the ends of space, the premise would still be in line with what Pucci wants to achieve anyway. And then, poetically or something, Jotaro would still die, and Jolene would then follow him and die there too. Jotaro's destiny does not give him good potential for a Requiem power. So who would have the best? The first candidate you'd think of would be Weather, because his stand does survive and triumph over those forces of the universe. And the idea behind it is that his strength is to automatically have influence over his wider circumstances. But if we're talking about the strongest Requiem that can happen, not the Requiem that would result in the best outcome for the user, we're fine if there's a Requiem that's busted, even if it has a temporary weakness and can't be used to its fullest potential, because by circumstance, it's defeated and undone before it can make itself invincible for the sake of the story. So what we're after is a Requiem that can improve itself with a power to make itself stronger. And to take it a step further, we're not just looking for a Requiem with the theme of growing in power. We want someone who already has a stand about growing stronger, so their Requiem locks in the result of that stand, with an ability to immediately jump to the maximum level of power possible over something and reach a full bracket of influence above what they were in before. Boy 2 Man's user doesn't have the strength to continuously grow stronger. He relied on the arrow's influence locking in his momentary potential as a child to give him a permanent stand power to continue growing, which is why he as a person can't heal the wound from the arrow, because he relies on it. Which means we only know one character whose strength is that they're fated by the universe to be able to accumulate power over time, which is Dio. Just like how the Joestars are cursed by the universe to constantly face trials, he's been destined to be the universe's instrument from all the way back in Phantom Blood. So until his influence spans the universe itself with the Heaven Plan, it's fated by the universe to get stronger and stronger to continue posing threats to the Joestars. After he gains immortality, the advantages he then gains from his immortality let him awaken the world, a stand with the premise of using everything as a stepping stone to climb higher, which manifests in two ways. There's the power to stop time and freeze everything, which lasts longer the more he uses it or the more power he acquires, symbolizing how he can use his advantages to suffocate those beneath him and gain more advantages. And there's also the stand's potential for the Heaven Plan, where instead of using his stand on everything, if he does the opposite and uses everything in the world around him like puzzle pieces, he can upgrade what his stand does, because the world is the stand of the person above everything, with the base ability to hold power over everything at once, and the open potential to expand its power further. nobody else is above him, so nobody can restrict him from reaching heaven or expanding what his stand has influence over. So if Dio changes what he has influence over as a person to then redefine his stand, he can snowball to acquire influence over the universe itself and lock in the ultimate power over everything. Dio loses in Part 3, and it's his consequences that have to torment the Joestars to the end of Stone Ocean. But he has the best potential for the strongest Requiem ability. It would just have to be something that would still allow Jotaro to beat him at the end of Part 3, which is completely doable because the whole idea of that conflict is that the Joestar who finally gets to take Dio out is a character who condenses his power and works under tight deadlines to be able to match Dio's advantages before Dio can grow too tall to reach. So a power to grow exponentially stronger would add to the pressure, but still be beatable within its moment of awakening. And another destiny affecting both Dio and Jotaro is the Tarot battle, which says that until one side is victorious, they'll both still have the opportunity to beat each other. For who knows how long, there's been this destined battle between stand users named after the Tarot deck, who have stands and roles in the conflict related to their cards. Dio's twisted version of the world is a lack of closure, because his existence continues to torment the Joestars, and his stand can hold time in place. But Jotaro's proper version of the star brings new hope, and holds on to the possibility of victory, because if he can squeeze all of his power together, he can still gather enough to challenge Dio and enter his time stop. The story ends with Jotaro learning to stop time himself, and then beating Dio, since his power of human concentration and effort given physical form is tougher than Dio's power of kicking down and coasting on inhuman fortune. So if Dio boosts the physical strength of his stand by exploiting the advantage of having the arrows in his arsenal and awakening a Requiem, Jotaro would have to start freezing time on his own way earlier in the fight and get used to it not being enough. And since he has the human limit of 5 seconds, unlike Dio's time stop, which for thematic reasons can likely extend endlessly longer, if Jotaro's version of time stop could let him learn to reduce the period he freezes time for to concentrate his stand's power during that time, then like Starfinger, by limiting the scope of the time stop, which would be the amount of time instead of the amount of the fist, he'd be able to compensate for the new difference in power and still beat Dio in their final collision. So in-universe, it would have been possible for Dio to awaken a Requiem that lets him grow exponentially stronger during Stardust Crusaders, because the nature of his strength would still allow a temporary vulnerability that would let Jotaro resolve the story. I was going to end the video there, because that was the point of it, but in case there's any interest, the specific power I'd imagine Dio would be able to get would be the power to turn the world to his side. He's using another part of his arsenal, the arrow, out of caution against Jotaro, and he's been using the arrows with his ultimate stand to spread his influence over the world and achieve the Heaven Plan. So locking that in a symbolic ability would let him add momentum to whatever his influence collides with, like any separate influence that encounters his or anything that enters his field of view. So he can start propelling, guiding, and moving them wherever he wants, which would be toward whatever he hasn't infected yet. Just like how Dio takes over things and uses them to grow in power, the theme is adding momentum, taking after the world's ability to expand what it has influence over when Dio uses the universe around him like a Rubik's Cube. This Requiem would have this power to spread momentum to what Dio's presence reaches, and to what those things then reach. And taking after the world's time stop to exert power over everything at once, his momentum can jump from a single infected target to whatever entire structure that target is part of, like from an individual tile in a mosaic to the entire mosaic, or a single star in the sky to a cluster of stars, because again it's based on his field of view for the scale at which the infection can spread. A person making contact with someone or some object that's been infected would have that part of their body start to contort and twist, and then it would settle, and their entire body would start moving to chase other people, in a way that would resemble Enya's corpse puppets. The crucial difference now between Enya and her leader being that instead of the strings of a limited supply of smoke, these bodies are driven by something incorporeal and endlessly scalable. Giving targets movement would be giving them a direction symbolic of spreading Dio's influence to the people and scenery around him, until the entire world quickly ends up under his guidance. Because while at first, parts of objects and then entire objects would physically move, Once Dio's momentum is shared by an object's wider environment, it would expand to be able to direct that object's wider fate, because motion is relative, and now Dio's Requiem is guiding the world around it. At least that's one idea that I feel could have worked for Dio's Requiem if he had awakened one at the end of part 3 for the story to still fit its themes and go in the direction it wanted to. Because Jotaro could totally still win.